Hello! So this is going to be a quick tutorial on just one option for creating a map in Unity. It's fairly simple, very straightforward and easy, but not quite like Far Cry 2 or Firewatch. But it is still going to be an option, maybe a good place to start in the meantime before you figure out something else that you'd like to do. But what I was thinking was to create a second camera. And you want to put this one, here I have my first person shooter controller, right? This is just a scene that I use to fiddle around with all sorts of things, test new ideas out and such. We put this camera on top of the controller here, and we center it. Now we know it's like smack dab right there, right? But what we're going to do instead is we're going to put it about 30 units above the character, and then we're going to rotate it so that it looks down. And we're going to set that to 90 degrees there. We can change this, either the height, we can change the height if we want to keep the perspective. The thing about that is in this scene I have some fog going on, so the farther away the camera is, the more fog we'll see and the kind of, in a sense, blurrier and more dull of a picture it'll be. So instead, what I think I want to do is I want to stay around that 30 area, and I want to change this perspective to orthographic. And then I'll just increase the size. So I'm increasing just how large of a view my camera is looking at. If I zoom out, you can kind of see this a little better. But I can change that size for what it sees. Now let's say I like that. So it's about 50 units. Then what I can do is I can take the camera off of the first person character, and I can see, okay, I'm at 0x, 0z, and 32 units above the character. Let's just put that at a nice round 30 units. So what we see here, this game preview, is going to be what we would want our map to display. So now we need to put it somewhere. What we can do is, going back to our character, we can now create a plane object. We can bring these scales down a bit. So let's try 0.6 now, 06, 0.06, 0.06. So the best way, I think, to do this, to make our map fit our camera display in-game best, is by first selecting the main camera that is being used for that first-person camera view, and then you can select the plane. Let's go ahead and rename this to our map. And now we can just make the adjustments of our map and its position and rotation so that it looks decent in our game. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so I think that's a pretty decent start, and because this is just an intro tutorial of something simple, you can make any modifications you'd like from here. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to create, oh boy, is that here? No. We want to go into our project tab, and we want to create something new. We're going to create something called a render texture. This is like any texture you put onto a model, but here it's going to be our map texture. And it's a special kind of texture because it's being rendered. It's not being pre-made at all, and we can just drag that right onto our map. What that does is it puts our materials as map texture 1 here. So now when we go back to our camera, then we can, in the settings of camera, we can select our target texture here. So we can select that map texture, and now we see what the camera sees right there. So now that we have our map in the best spot, let's go ahead and drag it into that first person controller so that it's a child object and it follows around with us everywhere we go. So now when we play our game, and we see we got some stuff happening. We have a map and life is pretty good. Now a couple of things we can do from here. One is if you don't like the way that that looks, you can put the map onto the camera itself so that even as the character moves, the map moves with it and looks a lot more still. Two, I didn't include any hands. I'm going to leave that for you to figure out if you like or don't like, but that's just one extra additional feature. Wouldn't be necessarily too hard. I just didn't want to include it in this tutorial. So a couple more places we can go from here. We can go to our camera and we can add a script. Let's go ahead and add one that I already made, but it's really easy and I'll show you what that is. I called it my map camera script. And the only thing on here is a global variable called the player, referencing the game object of the player. And in the update function, it's just going to set the camera's position to be equal to that of the player plus some height that you set. So in our case, we said 30 units. So it'll be 30 units up from the player, but otherwise it follows the player around. So now before we can actually use it, we need to reference that player object. So you can just come up here and grab this. And now, as we hit the play, we see that our map changes with us. This is a totally optional feature. If you don't like it, you don't have to use it, of course. Or you can always set this camera larger or smaller. And if you don't want to use the feature, but you're not sure you want to get rid of it entirely, then the other option is just to disable this script at the time. I kind of like it following around, so I'll leave it on. And then one last thing is that it was still kind of hard to gauge exactly where we were, so maybe we want to put the player on the map. One way we can do that is we can add either a 3D object or a 2D object. In this case, it's at a 2D object, a sprite. So let's make that sprite just be a little circle. So we'll grab the default knob here. You can use whatever you want. You can use any sorts of inspiration that you'd like. Let's set this a little larger. And then we're going to have to rotate it to match. Now we can see it start to show up, but it's sitting right on that edge and it doesn't necessarily always show itself. So if we pull it away from the surface of our map here just a little bit, so it's sort of always hovering right over the map, then it should be displayed a lot better. If you want to put that closer, by all means, feel free. And now this little red dot, since it's centered right on the center of the map itself, and because our camera is centered directly over us, then the red dot won't technically move, but the camera will. So the red dot symbolizes what our player, the red dot symbolizes where our player is in the map. So if we hit play, so there you have it. Just one option for putting a map into your game. It's not necessarily polished up by any means. You can make adjustments from here, but I think it's a good place to get you started. So, hope this helped. Good luck!